Good morning, everyone. I'm trying to load the slides, but we know officially the Wi-Fi here is not very good. Okay, let's see. And these are my notes. Wait a second. Okay. Okay. Can you see clearly there? Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry. Good morning. Thanks for coming, and you're still awake. I'm so happy for that. I'm a third-year PhD student at Northwestern University, and I'm glad to present our work on team formation systems that have been conducted at the Sonic Lab and Atlas Lab. And also, I just want to acknowledge all the work that our co-workers and co-authors have been done. Professor Noshir, Contractor, is also here, so if you want to talk about this research work after the talk. Imagine yourself at the moment of creating a team. Most of you have some teams at work and offices, and you already know who are part of your social networks. You know who are your friends, your collaborators, and so on. But how can you assemble teams for more specific purposes, especially when you look for more needs on other people, and when you need to go beyond our current knowledge and your current social connections? Nowadays, online platforms are reconfiguring how people are teaming up with others, enable them to discover new connections and new possibilities. However, little is known about how these users search for and choose teammates on these social platforms. Most of the studies have been put a lot of attention on team composition when the team was already formed. And that has direct consequences on the formation of those teams. In terms about just like when the process of team formations are weak, that can just lead to disharmony, disorganization, lack of cohesion, and most important things just like, for example, lack of diversity on those groups. For that reason, and with that motivation, we studied how user traits and social connections influence when people are searching and deciding who is going to be part of their teams, and also when they have to do these processes in online platforms. To support this work, we did like a literature review, and we were trying to find all those studies at the ICM who were working on or researching on team formation systems. We displayed those teams or these studies according to these two dimensions. On the horizontal axis, you can see it's based on how the team formation is driven. On the left, you will see teams that are driven by users, and on the right, you can see those teams that are driven or formed by algorithms or the systems. On the vertical axis, you will see that it could be one entity who can just like lead the formation of the team. In this case, it could be a person or a machine. And on the other side, you will see when users have the freedom to choose who are going to be part of the team. So those are the self-assembled teams. We want to focus on those teams precisely because of two reasons. First of all, social media platforms allow us just like to choose our social connections. Who are going to be your friends, to whom you are going to follow, and those things are just like free to choose in social media. And also, users and people can be more committed and engaged in those teams where they have the freedom to choose who are going to be part of their teams. Based on those dimensions, we decided just like to, and sorry, I just skip one slide. What is going on? Sorry. Sorry, the internet is not working so well. Based on these formation systems, we wanted to see and explore how these users were just like making those decisions. So we explored and created this theoretical background related to two main dimensions that compose our social connections and individual traits. First of all is competence, talks about the individual skills and knowledge that each one of us has. Also, we have warmth that tell us a little bit more about the values and the truthworthiness, just like each one of us has, things related with team values, creativity, and if we believe in leadership or not. And on the right, we can see another dimension that tells us about their connections with others. In the first one is just bonding capital that explains the quality of connections between two people. And the last one, bridging capital, tells about the people who are occupying a specific position on those social networks. Those who are very popular, who knows a lot of people, or can be brokers, like bringing together different communities. So basing on those 4 dimensions, we established 4 research questions about these team formation processes that can occur online. First research question is like, what do users search for? And after when they found some potential teammates, who do users invite? The third research question is like, who do users accept? And after all this organic process finish, we want to see what kinds of teams form. And for this, we just conducted a field study to observe how team assembly was like occurring in online settings. And we developed an online team formation system where users were just like leading all these processes. They were searching, inviting, and accepting or declining in like working with others. And based on these research questions, we use these dimensions of human and social capital in order to explain and have some answers. A little bit about that, you can find more details on the paper. We conducted this study in 8 classes in the United States. We have 530 students, and we have a proportion of them that were undergraduates and graduate students. In total, we had 90 teams. We have a good balance in terms of gender. Median age was 24 years, and the goals of those teams, depending on the classes, undergraduates have projects, but most of the graduate classes, we have small discussion groups. I'm going to show a little bit of the interface of this platform. In the first stage, we ask students dimensions in terms of we're trying to assess human and social capital. We have several dimensions in order to capture those skills on their social networks. So we conducted survey and like these kind of questions, and also we conducted sociometric questions like this. For example, they have to say who did they know, who were their friends, and so on. And in order just like to dimension those, like human capital, social capital, they were dimensioning in these attributes. So for example, in human capital, we split the competence and warm based first in like using the project skills that each class needed to, in order to assemble those teams. And in warm, we selected like if the students believe or have team values, if they believe that they have strong social skills, creativity, leadership, and personality. And on the second side, we have social capital. So we were asking them their friends, their prior collaborations, if they have shared collaborators, and also the system, based on those questions, calculated the number of cultures that they have, the numbers of friends, and what positions they were playing in those social networks. In the second part, after we assessed all this information, users were able to make some search queries, and when they could select what kind of dimensions or attributes they were looking for those specific teammates. They could select what was more important or what was less relevant according to human and social capital. And after that, the system created this rank list according to the query that the users made. So for example, you can see this is like an example. Users can start exploring the profiles and sending invitations to assemble teams. Finally, when a user receives an invitation, send like a he/saw or like a message like this, and the user could just decide if he wanted or not to work with them, and could just see the name of the sender and also the people who were part of that team. I just want to explore a little bit about the results. And I'm just reading this according to the research questions. So the first one, in terms of what users search, most of the searches were related to human capital, in this case about competence and warmth, over social capital. Most of the users were exploring and asking for those who have at least one project skills or more. And also on the second group, people were looking for those individuals who had like a strong commitment with team values, with social skills, creativity, and leadership. Interestingly, this was like opposite at the moment we had to invite. When we tried to look for this, we separated like the stages of team formation. When at the beginning they were just assembling the teams between diets, when the teams were growing, and at the end we're just like finalizing, trying to find the final teammates. Overall, we found that bonding capital was the most predictive attribute, and that means just like users were tending to invite those who are already friends, those who had working with in the past, and also those who they know, instead of just like choosing people who at least at the System Explorer show that they have strong skills or they have strong warmth attributes. Interestingly, women were more likely to receive invitations at the end of those process. And on the other side, in terms about the receivers, we found similar attributes in terms about bonding and bridging capital, where the attributes that most explained the user's acceptances, those were varied according to the stage. And in contrast, for example, people who have strong skills, they were less likely to be accepted, especially at the beginning. Finally, just like what kinds of teams form, we based, after all teams were assembled, we created different cluster analysis based on the human capital and social capital. In this one, we use key means and principal component analysis in order to understand the characteristics of those teams. In this plot, we can see three main groups. On the left, you see 30% of these teams, they were concentrated most of the expertise on those warm skills. So we have teams just like most of these people are very competent and just like they're very good, just like in terms of believing in teamwork or like in leadership. On the middle, you have 44%, and we have this contrast about teams who have low competence, but they have high warm skills. And in the last one, 24%, they have high competence, but low warm skills. And the other cluster, and also we found interesting in terms about the segregation situation, just like 31% of the teams concentrated most of the social connections among those classes. Then we have another group, 20%, like those at least containing brokers, people who were able to connect different groups, just like they were more familiar with others in the classroom. And 49% of the teams, like those members have very small social networks. They didn't have so many friends. They didn't know too many people. In the discussion, so in order to wrap up these results, first of all, we found that users focused primarily on competence on warm when they were searching for others. And those are the things like are less visible usually in terms of what platforms can provide us more guidance in terms of how to find those individuals. However, bonding capital was ultimately determinant in the users' invites. And also that was reflected at the moment of say yes or no to someone who wanted to work with each one of us. And finally, we saw this segregation situation in terms of we have a small number of teams who concentrated most of the skills, most of the warm attributes, and also just like most of the social capital. And that has in terms of management size, that is consistent with previous studies. We know that social connections are fundamental for the team selection. But interestingly, in terms of and also in the Sky context, we found that online platforms replicate and even can make worse those behaviors. So the question here is how we can just explore new systems in order to make a better balance in between individuals' agency to choose their teammates, but at the same time we want to create more functional and more diverse teams. These information could lead to that segregation, and we can try to explore more hybrid approaches in order to make this balance. Some of the steps that can be in the future, for example, one is computation augmentation, and that means just the system is able to, and because it has the big picture, it could just help the users to enable them and in their searches, in their choices. Another situation could be simulating teams. Individuals could just trying to randomize or just trying to explore what are the best teams for them in terms about the efficiency and trying to think more about the tasks instead of, for example, their social connections. Providing this kind of tools can just open the views and also just the point of views, and they can just explore other alternatives. Finally, we are just exploring, for example, how team systems can become social agents, introducing people to each another. For example, those individuals who can be complementary to each other, but they don't know. So that could be a role technologies can assume in the future. Some other limitation that this study has, first of all, the system configuration may have affected users' behaviors and decisions. And also, it could be users' self-reported traits and networks cannot be realistic. And finally, we didn't control what students did outside of the platform. So, for example, any kind of messages, if they were using Facebook or whatever, just to reach out or just contacting, we didn't control those things. So for our reason, we're interested in the future to just conduct lab experiments in order to see, for example, how human capital and social capital could affect the formation of those teams, also how the platforms affect those situations, and to link finally how these processes that are mediated by these platforms affect the team performance and the cohesion. In conclusion, the takeaways is just like, at the moment when people are using the social platforms to search for other potential teammates, at the beginning they use competence and worth in order to find those. However, at the moment it's just like making this final call, bonding capital was the most important factor in order to invite or to say yes and to work with someone. And finally, these systems can lead to desegregation of groups that could be like negative consequences in terms about if we want just like to create better teams and more skilled teams in order that they can provide better outcomes and efficiencies. Thank you so much for your time, for being here, and I hope that you enjoyed this talk. I'm open to the questions. Thank you.
Thanks for Diego. Is there any questions?
Hi, I'm Claudio Pianist from IBM Research. You studied a structure which is quite flat and highly emotional, say students. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I wonder how this would change, how you would think this would change if you go to an organization that has more hierarchical structure, more professional structure, like suppose a big consulting firm that has to assemble teams to work in projects, that kind of stuff.
That's a good question, and that was one of the reasons of diversifying the sample. So undergraduates we found in terms about differences because undergraduates were more likely to invite friends. In the graduate classes, we have two executive classes, just like people who were doing their masters during like in the night. And we found that they have another kind of behavior. They were more likely, instead of just like invited friends, because they didn't have any friends in that context, they were more likely to invite those who already worked in the past. But I think that could be an extension in terms about if we replicated this study in another context, for example, in an organization or like different units, for example, in a company has different departments, that could also explain what in terms about social capital, I believe like it would be still present there, but in terms about if it's more determinant, just like having a friendship or just like having working with someone in the past, that could be like the difference between those characteristics of domains. Does that respond to the question? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. We have a question there.
Excuse me?
They're still trying to reach out each other.
Thank you. I have a question about the teams and how they made their teams. So you said it was mostly based on who their friends were or who they collaborated in the past. So my question is, do you think that maybe the people who they collaborated in the past were also had a high competitiveness? How did you distinguish between like who has a high competitiveness and who has the bonding capital?
Right. Thanks for the question. It's a good, interesting. About an analysis we made, like we separated like those dimensions. So the moment they had to reply the survey, they had individually say, like, for example, the skills, in terms of about if they feel competent or not, for example, according to each class. For example, in one of the undergraduate classes, we have coding skills presentations. So we were measuring that way. And also we were just like measuring the social connections separately. It will be interesting just like to see kind of those interaction patterns. So for example, at the end to see if I want to work with that person because I know that he's competent, and that's the reason behind, or because it's just like I know him and I just prefer to work with someone who I already know that someone like I don't know. We didn't like include in like these hierarchical linear models, just like those kind of interactions that will be interesting to explore. But at least the impression that we have, at least when we run all this analysis, is just like people, at least like the classes were not so dense. People didn't know too much each other. So at least when they have friendships, just like that was more determinant in terms about people who even they didn't have enough like competence, they were very popular in order to receive some of those invitations to assemble a team. I think that will be interesting to explore in the future, and I don't have like the answer right now. So
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
We have 1 minute for one question more.
Hi, Vidya from Newcastle University Open Lab. You said 9 classes. Was that across different universities or was just one university?
One question. Those were 3 different universities in the U.S. And just like to clarify, the teams were inside of each class. So we had different times. Just like these studies were conducted between 2016 and 2018. So not necessarily just like they were assembled teams with people from other universities or from other classes. So for this analysis, we just run hierarchical linear models in order just like to trying to find those attributes that could explain across all these classes, but also just like considering like the differences between, for example, graduate classes or undergraduate teams.
All right. So thanks for Diego.
Thanks for your time.